Every time a new Helluva Boss episode comes out, I'm filled with a lack of enthusiasm as this show will either deliver an extraordinarily underwhelming entry, or at best, episodes that aren't bad, but not good enough to keep me invested in where the show is going. The last time I watched a Helluva Boss episode that I truly loved was back when Unhappy Campers came out, and that was in July of 2023. But finally, after so long and after going through so much disappointment and irritation with this show, we have been rewarded with, for YouTube's sake, let's just call it Ghostfers, an episode that is on the same level of quality as the episodes that made me love this show in the first place. I'm going to go over a summary of the events that happen within this episode, so if you want to get right to the review, skip to the time displayed on screen. The episode begins with Millie walking into the disaster that is the IMP office. Apparently, since Stolas moved on from Blitz, he has been rapidly spending money on things he doesn't need, which has sunk the company into a financial collapse. Millie tries to console Blitz, but he's already too far gone eating his feelings away while watching raunchy Ghost X Human videos, and they're interrupted when a client enters the office explaining that she was killed by a ghost, which Millie doesn't believe in, but Blitz, who is now obsessed with sleeping with a ghost after all the videos he watched, takes up the offer. Before Millie and Blitz go to Earth, Millie convinces Luna to try to take care of Moxie, who after seeing their financial situation is having a mental breakdown, and Luna begrudgingly agrees. Blitz and Millie arrive at the hotel where the client died and get the keys to all the rooms from the front desk clerk, harass the guests a bit during a musical montage, and Blitz and Millie escape from said outraged guests into the air ducts. Millie is sick of how Blitz has been behaving, as all he's been focused on during their entire trip is having sex with a ghost, and she splits off so she can actually finish the job. Once Blitz is alone as he's crawling through the vents, he crawls through some oily substance created by an unseen creature, and once he's out of the vents, he is swarmed by a bunch of undead and disfigured Millies who call him out for destroying all the relationships he's ever had. Blitz tries to run away, but only encounters a hallucination of his mom as he watches her burn away as he desperately tries to apologize to her for what happened. Millie then finds Blitz in one of the rooms crying, and he tells her to get back because he ruins every relationship he gets involved in. Millie tells Blitz that's not true and to remember how they met, bringing us to a flashback of their first encounter. After Millie stole one of Blitz and Moxie's hits, Blitz tracked her down to a bar in Wrath with the intention of recruiting her, but given Millie's hot-headed and defensive nature, it quickly led to an evenly matched fight between the two, which impressed Millie enough to join IMP, and it's through IMP where Millie started to believe she could be more than just a common goon or farm girl, and became the assassin she always wanted to be, alongside meeting her future husband, and it was all thanks to Blitz believing in her. Millie apologizes for getting mad at Blitz earlier because she wasn't used to seeing a person she admires and was always so unbothered by the harshness of life be reduced to a self-pitying wreck after what happened with Stolas. The two make up and continue on their job, and it doesn't take long for the supposed ghost to reveal himself. In actuality, the ghost was the front desk clerk named Rolando, who is really an infestor demon who uses the hotel as his hunting ground. He attacks and overpowers the imps and possesses Blitz, gaining access to all his thoughts and memories, and forces him to rewatch all the traumatic events that have happened to him throughout his life. As Millie tries to wake Blitz up, Rolando takes control of his body with the intention of ruining Blitz and Millie's relationship, and tries to convince Millie that Blitz doesn't actually think highly of her or respect her. This is short-lived, however, as Millie doesn't believe a single thing Rolando says and beats the possession out of Blitz's body, giving Blitz back control of himself. Blitz then knocks the weakened Rolando into the hotel pool, and knocks a vacuum cleaner into it, electrocuting Rolando and killing him. Once Millie and Blitz leave the hotel, Millie emphasizes how Blitz is his best friend, and Blitz says he's never had a friend he didn't want to have sex with, and brings up that he's no longer going to try to sexually impede on Moxie and Millie's relationship. The episode ends back in the IMP office, as Moxie continues to have his mental breakdown, and Luna calms him down by sitting him in front of the TV so he can watch a musical version of the show Blitz was watching. It's been a long time since we had a Helluva Boss episode where I think every single character was handled exceptionally. Blitz in this episode may not be in his best shape ever, but it is so nice to see him focus on something that isn't Stolas related, even if Stolas' presence is felt throughout the entire episode, especially the beginning and end. I know for a fact that I'm not alone in feeling like season 2 is focused way too much on Stolitz, and with how long this season has been running, just being a Helluva Boss fan is exhausting enough, but when you have to see the main character of the show be emotionally tormented by his past and have a messily written arc of being in a pseudo relationship with Stolitz, seeing Blitz ignore all that briefly, even if it requires him to be obsessed with sleeping with a ghost, or have his development at the end of the episode with him no longer being attracted to Moxie and Millie's relationship seem inconsequential, as that aspect of his character hasn't mattered or been prominent since season 1. It still feels like the biggest breath of fresh air we have gotten since the mid-season special, which came out a year ago. Sure, there is still the typical amount of self-loathing and trauma Blitz has to go through throughout the episode, and sure, a sizable margin of his screen time is when he's acting as Bethany, which felt unnecessary and forced, because his entire obsession with ghosts feels very sudden and like it came out of nowhere, as he's never really shown any fascination with ghosts before, but none of it is so egregious that I consider either of those ways Blitz behaved as an overall negative, and while they may be tiresome at times, I can't say I really disliked any of those scenes. But once we get into the second half of the episode and he starts bonding with Millie, I would argue that Ghostfers produced some of the best exploration of a relationship between two characters we have ever gotten in the show. I'm sure if you looked back you could find some other scenes that might bypass this one, but just like Blitz not obsessing with Stolas, the reason this scene is so enjoyable is because it felt like something that should have happened literal years ago. And we are finally getting it. And this sentiment reflects just as strongly when we get to Luna. Although Luna doesn't have much screen time, I must say out of all the episodes in season 2, this might be one of her best episodes, which I think goes to show just how badly she has been handled in this season, but this episode breaks the mold. But just like Blitz, all her best moments come from her interactions with other characters. It's felt like a long time since we saw Moxie and Luna actually interact with each other, and although the interaction they do have is extremely brief, it's just nice to see this uncommon pair share a scene together that resulted in a genuinely funny ending to the episode. But the real standout scene for Luna is her interaction with Millie. It's been so long since Millie and Luna interacted with each other that I think the last time these two had a conversation was all the way back in Truth Seekers, which, mind you, came out 3 years ago now. So just like Moxie, it's just nice to see them interact again, but the ever so brief meaningful heart-to-heart Millie has with Luna is exactly what both these characters needed. As I mentioned, Luna has been mishandled throughout the entire season, and the last time we saw her show an ounce of actual characterization was back in Seeing Stars with Octavia, but that characterization was completely ruined by the scene that came afterward. So it's felt like Luna has been a static and pointless character since season 2 began, and while all Luna does in this scene is commit a favor for Millie, it's something. And Luna really needed something. I know it may seem like I'm grasping at straws here, but when it comes to writing and developing characters, it's the little interactions that have some of the heaviest impacts and believably flesh out characters while making them feel more naturally likable as they are just acting like themselves, without it feeling forced. And Luna, while not having much to work with within this episode, was utilized as effectively as she could be with the material she was given, and excelled in every scene she was in. And unbelievably enough, just like Luna, there is another character that gets minimal screen time, but that doesn't stop him from almost stealing every scene he's in. Despite Moxie barely being in this episode, I really enjoyed his inclusion as he's basically background comedy relief, and just about every scene he's in fulfills that purpose more than effectively. It seems like the Spindlehorse team has been fully embracing Moxie as a sort of meme character throughout season 2, with his over-the-top facial expressions and childish nature, and I completely approve of this change to his character because despite him being a meme character when he's not the main focus, when he is the main focus, he can still be treated as more than just a meme character. The memification of Moxie has been handled surprisingly well, and this episode arguably has done it better than any other episode that has come before it. But outside of Moxie being a joke, we also get slight backstory development on the origins of how he met Millie, with it being revealed that he knew her before he had ever officially met her, which could imply that he had a crush on her before she ever knew who Moxie was, and was potentially stalking her, or just by chance heard of her combat skills and recommended her because of that, and fell completely in love with her the moment he first saw her. Either way, I am pleasantly surprised with this backstory reveal, as I have always assumed Millie fell in love with Moxie first, but by that not being the case, it makes Millie feel less like an accessory to Moxie, because assumedly, it was him who had to impress her, and win Millie over, which is far better for both Millie and Moxie's characters than if it was vice versa. Now, up to this point, there has been a name that I've mentioned every time when it came to the 3 previous characters, best moments, and interactions, and even though all those scenes were all very good, the character herself bypasses all of them. Ever since Helluva Boss premiered a year ago, it has been unanimously agreed that the most disrespected and underdeveloped character in the entire series is Millie. She has barely had any screen time, she rarely ever gets developed, everything she does revolves around Moxie, and every time she has gotten the spotlight, it's always to show her off as a killing machine, which dehumanized her into feeling like an emergency crutch to get the rest of the cast out of bad situations. But now in this episode, for the first time ever since Helluva Boss started 4 years ago, we not only get to see Millie separated from Moxie, but we also get to learn more about her as a person and explore her relationships with other characters. I already went over just how amazing this episode is with building Millie's relationship with Luna and Moxie, but when it comes to Blitz, it's an entire different level of writing, with Millie expressing how important Blitz is to her and how his belief in her ended up completely changing her life, and because of that, she looks up to him, and seeing him be so unstable negatively affects how she feels, as he's in a way almost a role model for Millie. I would be lying if I said this development between Millie and Blitz didn't feel artificial, as although Millie has shown respect for Blitz, it's never come off as anything more than a positive workplace relationship, but it works so well that I'm willing to buy it, and it can explain why Millie has been so patient and respectful of Blitz, along with recontextualizing all the positive interactions with him she's had in the past. But when it comes to Millie herself, I'm not going to say that it's some of the best character development I've ever seen in anything I've reviewed, but she's just all around good. The exploration about her not believing she's anything special is a simple yet effective dive into her past, and her being the entire driving force behind the episode who is basically keeping IMP and everyone else afloat feels like a respectful way to show how essential she really is to the entire team beyond being the muscle of the group. I do find it ironic though that there is that scene where Millie feels undeserving of their success because imps are typically treated as nothing more than muscle, which is not only a great insight into Millie's past insecurities that later is used against her by Rolando, giving Millie an opportunity to show how much more mentally secure she has become since then, but also it's just a nice addition to the world building that further emphasizes how discriminated against the imps in hell are. But the only thing I can think about during this scene is that this past insecurity of Millie's is kind of proven to be true when the writers of this show have rarely treated Millie as nothing more than the muscle of the team, so this moment, while it is great for Millie as a character, comes off as insincere and inconsistent with the way she has been treated throughout the entire series. But as far as developing and showing respect to a supporting character like Millie goes, Ghostf does both those things for her very well, and I don't think I would change a single thing when it comes to how well this episode handled Millie and gave her the long overdue spotlight that she hasn't only earned, but deserves. Lastly, we have the antagonist of the episode, Rolando. As we all know by now, Helluva Boss has had a severe issue with how it handles its villains, but I'm happy to say that while he may not be complex, Rolando delivers in every way necessary to create a decent villain. He's a legitimate threat. He gets to know how they think, how they feel, and uses it to his advantage to affect them, and he has a unique moveset that makes him fun to watch. He's a capable villain of the weak character who lives up to his role well, and when you compare him to all the other villain characters in this show, he is probably one of the best because he maintains that air of superiority and competency without him ever feeling like a joke. Like I said, Rolando is not a complex villain, but when it comes to writing one-off villains, he's everything he needed to be, and I would argue, even slightly more. Ghostf easily has the best characterization of its cast in all of Season 2, and may be one of the best character-focused episodes we have ever gotten. Blitz, while he's far from perfect, brings to the table all the chaos and stupidity that we love him for, accompanied by one of the best bonding scenes in the entire series. Moxie is nothing more than comedy relief, and he excels at that task. Luna's brief interactions with Millie and Moxie are genuinely her best moments in all of Season 2. Rolando is one of the best villains we have ever gotten throughout the entire series, and this is undeniably Millie's best episode and has some of the best emotional bonding moments with the rest of the cast, not only in Season 2, but Helluva Boss in its entirety. Outside the characters, however, there is a very large variety of very good scenes, but despite how good this episode is, there are moments that highlight not really problems with this episode, but the overall production of Helluva Boss as a whole. In usual Helluva Boss fashion, there is a song implemented into this episode, and just as usual, it's an unnecessary addition to the episode, but the song itself is nothing usual at all. When Helluva Boss introduces music into its episodes, it usually has a very Broadway feel to the songs in question, but this song, Spooky Kind of Love, is pure, unserious fun that, as I have rewatched the episode, has grown on me a lot. It's the type of song that reminds me of early 2000s Scooby-Doo, where it's thematically appropriate with the episode's subject matter and is nothing more than just a quirky, jocose segment accompanied by equally playful visuals that results in a pointless but uplifting childish display that contrasts nicely to a show that has been so reliant on adult themes. I know this may surprise some people that watch my channel, but I believe that having nonsensical juvenile fun in shows like this is an underappreciated creative decision, as at the end of the day this is a cartoon, and while cartoons aren't necessarily always a childish medium, I think once in a while a nostalgic reminder of the kind of entertainment we watched as children can be extremely effective as long as it's not overdone or disruptive and presented in a way that is a tongue-in-cheek homage to its source material without being disrespectful, and I think Spooky Kind of Love achieved all those prerequisites adequately. There is also a brief horror-esque scene where Blitz sees a bunch of deformed versions of Millie, which while I can't exactly say is scary, it's an admirable attempt at horror, as even back in Truth Seekers, I think the horror scenes in Helluva Boss does really fit the show, and the art style of Helluva Boss can result in some pretty disturbing imagery at times, so while it's not really a necessary scene, I overall enjoy the effort that was made here at horror, and it thematically fits the rest of the episode. But the big standout scene of Ghostf, and arguably the best scene of the episode, is the flashback to how Blitz met Millie and the fight that follows afterward. As a person who has been waiting to see Millie's character expanded on for so long, the only word I can use to convey my feelings for this entire scene is catharsis. This is the scene I think every Millie fan has been dreaming of for years, as it serves as an answer to the drought of Millie-focused scenes this show has had throughout its lifetime, while expanding on her backstory and exploring her personality, insecurities, and motives. That paired along with a fight scene that is by no means amazing, but surprisingly entertaining to watch, as the gimmick of the fight is focused on Millie and Blitz interacting with the environment the fight takes place in, results in the holy grail of Millie scenes, and is easily one of her best scenes in the series. But despite my extremely positive praises for Ghostf, even it has some scenes that aren't only questionable, but oddly self-aware. There is a brief moment where Blitz has trouble coming up with an insult and just admits that he was trying to say something sexual, which feels almost like a response to the criticism this show gets for how many sex jokes this show has. I don't know if the writers intended for this line to come off as an admission of how overly sexual the comedy is in the show, but if you are like me and have some fatigue at how overly lewd this show is when it comes to comedy, it certainly makes one raise an eyebrow and wonder if there was a hidden intention behind that line. But if there's a hidden moment that feels like a complete admission of this show's at times sloppy writing, during Blitz's torment by Rolando, where he has to rewatch all his trauma for a brief moment, you can see that Blitz got kicked in the crotch by Luna back in Seeing Stars, which confirms that that moment was more than just a joke scene and actually scarred him. As a person who called Luna out for this a long time ago, this moment was extremely vindicating, and it's nice to see the writers in a way admit that Luna crossed the line in that scene. And lastly, probably one of the most overtly self-aware moments in this series.
Nobody cares about you or what you want. They're too caught up in their own misery to even remember you exist.
Yeah, this line basically sums up how Millie has been treated in this show. Now, I'm sure many could argue that this moment could come across as lampshading, but given how well Millie is written and treated in this episode, I take it more as an acknowledgement of the writer's past mistakes when it comes to how this character has been handled, and moving forward they are going to try to treat Millie with some more respect, and although this is just my interpretation, I am going to hold them to that, as now I can always point to this moment if Millie is mistreated as badly in Season 3 as she was throughout Seasons 1 and 2. But ironically enough, be it these scenes being intentionally meta or not, there are some moments that, if you perceive in a meta way, come off as completely unbelievable, and it feels like the writers are trying to gaslight the audience into believing that Millie was a more fleshed out character than she actually was. There's two moments in this episode that come across this way. One where Millie says she's always liked having fun with Blitz, and that Blitz is her best friend. Before this episode, Blitz and Millie have almost never interacted with each other, and the only time they ever have has always been in a wink wink nudge nudge way, where they are overly friendly with each other because they have no reason to dislike each other, and they have respect for each other as business partners, but not as friends. Millie has always treated Blitz as her boss, and Blitz has always treated Millie as a hard-working associate, but they have never once bonded or had fun with each other just for the sake of enjoying each other's company. So when Millie said that she always liked to have fun with Blitz, the first thing that came to mind is that all the fun she has in her life is when she's at work doing her job, and when she says he's her best friend, I immediately assumed it was by proxy because she has nobody else in her life to call a friend, which are both almost depressing reminders that Millie has no interests or life outside of being married to Moxie and her work at IMP, which made these emotional moments almost come off as pathetic on Millie's part, and that's the complete opposite impression of Millie these scenes were meant to convey. And unfortunately, Millie isn't the only character who feels like she's inconsistent with the rest of the show, as there are moments where the writers are writing like they watched a different show than we did, and it hurts the continuity of the episode. The moments I'm referring to are right after Blitz recovers from his first hallucination and tells Millie he makes everyone's lives worse, and when Rolando tells Blitz that he's looking forward to seeing how he reacts to losing the last person who cares about him, but neither of these moments make sense because, well, oops happened. The fact that Blitz has already repaired his relationship with Fizzaroli by this point in the series completely undermines both these moments, because although Blitz did indirectly make Fizzaroli's life worse, he should know that the only reason that things went so bad between Fizz and him is because of a misunderstanding, and even if Millie hated him by the end of this episode, he would still have Fizzaroli as a shoulder to lean on. So this really brings into question, why didn't this episode premiere before Oops did? And that brings me to my only real complaint about this episode, which isn't even about the episode itself. It's about its placement in Season 2. Back when Vivian made her infamous Millie response on Twitter, she revealed that there would be more Millie-focused episodes in the future, and if we are to assume that she planned out this episode back around the time she made that statement, if not before that statement was made, my only question is, why did this episode release so late into Season 2? Before Season 2 had even come out, fans were pointing out at how underdeveloped and one-note Millie was, and there was a high demand to see an episode focused about her, especially since literally every other character in this series, some as minor as Octavia and Luna, had episodes focused on them before Millie even had one. Sure, I don't think this episode would have been appropriate for being the first episode of Season 2, but it absolutely should have been the second or third. The only real reason I can think of on why this episode premiered so late into the season is because it needed Blitz and Stolas' big breakup to happen to set up the events of this episode, but it really didn't. The only time Stolas is even mentioned is in the very beginning of the episode and the very end of the episode, and those could have easily been rewritten, but if you think about the way Blitz is acting and the way he's talking about Stolas, you wouldn't even need to heavily rewrite it. All you would have to do is make it so Blitz isn't referring to the falling out that happened in Full Moon, and make this entire episode be a direct follow-up to the events at Ozzy's. Blitz could have acted the same exact way he is in this episode if this was the second episode of this season, and a direct continuation of the Stolas arc right after the first serious falling out with Stolas. But if we were to give Vivian the benefit of the doubt and say that she didn't think of this episode until after X's and Oo's, would it have really been that hard to place this episode before Unhappy Campers or before Western Energy? Did it really need to be the third to last episode of a season that has been ongoing for 2 years now? And before anyone says that Vivian Madrano couldn't change the production order of this season because too much work went into it already, I would like to remind you that a completely different variation of this episode leaked a year ago, alongside mostly complete storyboards of said episode, and it was all scrapped and this episode was rebuilt from the ground up into what we have now. If Spindlehorse could write and storyboard a full episode and scrap it and start from the beginning again, I don't think it would have been that hard to restructure the episode release order of this season so that this episode could release before Oops did, so that the writing of this episode could at the very least be consistent with the events of previous episodes. Most Helluva Boss fans fell in love with this show for the quality of Season 1 and fell out of love for the series in Season 2. And this episode feels like it was ripped right out of Season 1. There may be a production reason for this, as this episode was written by Brandon Rogers, and if you know the implications of that, then I don't need to explain it to you, and if you don't, I will make a standalone video or short delving more in depth into that. But regardless, Ghostf's isn't only the best episode of Season 2, but one of the best episodes of Helluva Boss ever made. The characters are at some of the highest quality they have ever been since Season 1, with Millie being at her best ever. The comedy, while still being sexual, isn't excessive and feels more like the comedy we got in Season 1. The pacing, while a little long, isn't a negative, as there never felt like there were any moments that needed to be cut that would have noticeably improved the episode. For the first time since Unhappy Campers, the focus of the episode is centered around the premise of the series, which is the imps going to the human world and being assassins, which was the concept many fans fell in love with the series for, and this episode proves that that story structure can still be very entertaining even if there's only 2 members of the cast actually doing the job. The absence of Stolas felt like an alleviation of an ever-present shackle that has been holding this series back from reaching its true potential, and all around, it's just entertaining from beginning to end with minimal flaws to drag the episode down. Ghostf's is the best episode of Season 2. Millie's best episode, and is so good that I would say it surpasses even some of the episodes of Season 1, making it one of the best episodes of Helluva Boss ever produced, and a reminder of how good Helluva Boss was before its fall from grace.
Those fuckers.
The music.
The only reason you have a wife is because you're easy to manage. No, he's not, you bitch!